from the old plantation non-stop. Fight bail. Screams from the old plantation non-stop. Fight bail. Screams from the old plantation non-stop. Fight bail.
Awesome, man. Ronji, thank you so much for joining me on the Plantation Podcast today, man. I really appreciate you giving me the time.
Hey, Malone Gio, thanks for having me, bro. It'd be good. It's good to be here.
No, I appreciate it. I got onto you after, because I've been following the Doesnt Pacifica sort of like debate. I think they call it the TP Plus, and I watched you have a bit of a korero with Reverend Mua, and it was about cannabis, and it struck me quite strongly because your argument is an argument I don't hear often. Yeah, it's the argument against legalizing cannabis, and before we get into that, I think let's start from the beginning, and if you don't mind, just sort of introducing yourself a little bit, where you grew up, and sort of the work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, sure, bro. So, taloha whalawa, taloha ni, everyone. Name is Ronji Tanielu. I was born in Samoa, and then we came here in the 80s, but raised in the capital city of the whole universe, which is Mangere in South Auckland. And so, really proud of where I come from. 3/4 Samoan, a quarter Tokelauan. Be blessed with my background, my heritage. And I think, just long story short, I am a passionate follower of Jesus Christ, and everything that's what frames my views on life. I have a biblical worldview and a biblical lens, and so whether I look at an issue, a social issue, an economic issue, a violence issue, whatever, my context, my framework, my worldview is a biblical / Christian one. So have served as a missionary overseas with my wife, and we've lived and served in parts of Africa, parts of Asia. We're involved in a lot of university student ministry here in New Zealand. We moved back to New Zealand in 2017 after being away for a couple of years. And so really blessed to be back home safely. And currently, I work as a lawyer for the Salvation Army, although I'm not appearing on your podcast in that capacity, bro. That's my work. And so I have a really unique job, bro. My job is to create as much trouble as possible for politicians and for corporates. And I really enjoy it. But I think it's a lot of fun. And I'm really blessed because we have it's a Christian organization. We're a church before we're an NGO. And so we're able to advocate and lobby and argue from a Christian and biblical perspective when we're talking about policy, about law, about the social issues that we work with. And at the same time, it's a privilege to be part of an organization that works with 120,000 of some of the most vulnerable Kiwis in the country. So really blessed with my work, but in my spare time, also involved in the Say No to Dope Coalition, which is probably part of the reason why I'm sitting with you today, bro. So that's in a nutshell, that's me married to a beautiful Samoan woman who has to put up with all my rubbish, but she's a wonderful sister from West Auckland.
Westie, okay. You've saved yourself a little bit there after celebrating South Auckland, which I do love, by the way. But it's good to know that you also know the benefits of West Auckland as well. So that's cool.
We live in Glendean now, bro. So we're really blessed to since we moved back to New Zealand.
Right.
We just bought a house. We're moving back to South Auckland soon, but really enjoyed living out west. So
it's a different feel, like
good buzz.
West Auckland's a bit of a different feel, but I like both. But for some reason, I found myself migrating more out west. I don't know why, but it's worked out for the best for me anyway. So that's interesting. So what sort of got you? I know you mentioned before you're quite religious. Which I'm guessing was a big push towards your decision working for Sally's. But was there also another pull in terms of, were there things in the community that you were saying that sort of you felt that you could help, or things that you can change? What was the big motivation to sort of work for specifically the Salvation Army?
I think part of it is I'm really blessed with my Western education, and I count it a privilege that between my wife and I, we have 6 degrees.
Wow.
That doesn't make us smart. It just means that we've got student loans. And so, we're really blessed with our Western education because then we're able to function in both worlds. And so, our faith shapes everything that we do, but at the same time, we live in this real world where we have to learn how to apply our faith. And so as a Bible-believing, Christ-centered Christian, I'm not talking about church or religion here, but in terms of a relationship with Christ, that's what frames how we approach the issues and the things that we get involved in, whether it's a housing issue, a homelessness issue, an addictions issue, whatever the work is that we're involved in. There's a huge spiritual element to our work, but at the same time, I'm not campaigning against the legalizing of recreational cannabis from a Christian standpoint. I'm challenging this from an evidence-based standpoint around well-being, around crime statistics, around addictions. And so, yes, our faith frames us, and I'm blessed to be in an organization that allows me to do that. At the same time, there's multiple issues, bro, that I'm sure you know well, that affect not just Pacific communities, but communities in general. I'm not one that plays identity politics as much. I'm not really caught up in having everything come through a Pacifica lens. At the same time, by default, I'm Pacific. And so that's what drives my work in my community. And, things like gangs and drugs and the terrible housing conditions that our people live in South Auckland or West Auckland or Pacific people in general. Those are the things that drive the social change that I try to do as a Christian.
Yep, absolutely. And for a person like myself who's been working in mental health for coming up to 6 years now, and seeing all the struggles our society faces, that's a lot of the time not a lot of people realize. We are always presented New Zealand as this clean, green, multicultural paradise, which comparatively to other countries, we can claim that to a degree. But then with that, we do tend to sort of brush over all the other issues, like you mentioned, the social housing issues, the massive sort of drug and alcohol issues that we do have here in this country, poverty, and obviously quite recently, people are starting to pipe up a lot very strongly around, racism and things like that that's here. And it's a good point because these issues are issues that need to be addressed. And, but it's interesting that you mentioned you try not to sort of look at it. I don't know whether I'm misquoting you, but you sort of trying not to look at it purely through a Pacifica lens. What's the reasoning for that?
Yeah, I think with my work, it's more around what builds us as a nation. And so, by default, my first language is Samoan. Of course, I'm passionate about our Pacifica community, but at the same time, I'm passionate about seeing all people thrive, regardless of the situations, the ethnicity. That's why I said I don't play identity politics as such. And so I think we live in such a divisive society now. Everything is this person, outrage, racism, this. It's quite divisive. And so because a lot of my work, a lot of my focus has been around, okay, how do we get systemic change? How do we get structural change? Of course, because the numbers for Pacifica and Māori are terrible, we're always going to be involved at the core of the systemic change that we want, that I'm working for, that you're working for, that many of us are working for. But at the same time, I want to see a solo mother who's Palangi, who struggled and grinded in life to see her thrive as well. And so I think I'll give you an example, bro. A couple of years ago, even though I don't work with a Pacifica lens, but I wrote a report for the Salvation Army called More Than Churches, Rugby Players and Festivals. Okay. And all it was a statistical analysis of the state of Pacific people in our country. That I need to do that because I'm Pacific? No, not necessarily. It was a blessing to the Pacific community, but I wanted to highlight some of the huge structural issues that our Pacific people are facing. And part of that was the title, that we're more than just churches, we're more than just rugby players, and we're more than just people that dance and do a hula in front of you and entertain you. There's some serious issues. At the same time, some amazing strengths and resilience as well. And so, even though I don't necessarily have that lens in all of my work, man, by default, that's what that's what drives a lot of what I do, regardless. And so, and I'm blessed to be in a position that allows me to balance my faith, to balance my love for South Auckland and for people, but to balance also my heritage, my culture, and bring all of that into my work.
That speaks volumes to me, actually, and it makes sense. because, a couple of other episodes I've done, I talk about the differences between this collectivism, group thinking, and versus sort of being the individual, right? And you sort of identified that Palangi woman who's also struggling, but may sort of be, in a way, we tend to dismiss other non-brown people because they have some form of white privilege that's inherent to them, and for some reason our struggle is worse than theirs. I mean, that's the opinion some people hold. So the question that comes to mind for me is, we do have, especially in New Zealand, we're very blessed to be living in a country that's quite accepting. We have our flaws, obviously. It's not a perfect country, but we're quite an accepting country. And I believe inclusiveness is a very important part of that, And to a certain degree, having to identify this one's a Pacifica person, this one's a New Zealander, it sort of continues to, if anything, unintentionally creates a divide, if you get what I mean, right? So I guess when I look at that, because I work for mainstream, I don't necessarily work for a Pacifica specific service. I work for mainstream. And so sort of the conversation we're having now, what do you think about those specific services that cater specifically to Pacifica people? Is this something that we should be moving towards more, or moving away from, or having a combination of both?
Yeah, I think I personally think, Gio, it's a both and. I think those organizations that have a real specific focus on Māori and Pacific, on that kind of cultural background, I think that's really valuable as well. I think when you feature in challenges around English as a second language, or even as a third language, when you see some of the generational shifts that happen within Pacific communities, I think those organizations have real value. But at the same time, we need to be, as Pacific people, using this lens now, we need to be working across different sectors as well. Just like you're in mainstream, I'm in mainstream, working in corporates, working in governments, to continue to not, even though I'm blessed to go into a whole bunch of different places, I don't necessarily just advocate for Pacific. I advocate for those that are in need. Absolutely. And I think that's the challenge. And people might look at me and think, man, what a sellout. Man, you're a son of Mangele, a son of South Auckland. I don't think that's a sellout at all, because remember, my biblical framing says that there's a collective responsibility as a Christian. There's also an individual responsibility as a Christian. And even within philosophy and within society and within politics, there's collective versus individual. And I think it's never one or the other. It is both. So those Pacific organizations, I think, are really valuable. They do some really amazing work out there, but we need to be telling those stories within other mainstream organizations as well. And so I think it's a both and. And my organization can do a lot better when it comes to Pacifica. Hey, and we're the first to acknowledge that. And I think the church in general can do a lot better when it comes to Pacifica. And so there's always an acknowledgement that there's more work that needs to be done.
No, I agree. There needs to be more integration, right, in terms of the services that we provide. Like you cannot deny the importance of Pacifica caring for Pacifica, because there's a cultural knowledge and an experience that you can't teach. So obviously there's a benefit there, but at the same time, there's also other things that we need to learn from other cultures that can be beneficial to us. So I do agree in terms of the integration, and it is a combination of both, right? And similar to where I work, I feel like there's a reason why we still get Pacifica people, and Pacifica people don't always tend to choose to go to cultural specific services, because maybe it's something they don't connect with it, and but that's a different argument altogether,
Sorry, but I was just going to say that we get that as well, because we're a mainstream, predominantly white middle class organization as the Salvation Army, but we get a huge chunks of our clients are Māori and Pacific, and a lot of that is because they don't want to turn up to their own, to our own people, because there's a knowledge factor, there's a shame factor, there's a pride factor, and here they can come in and almost be invisible, in the sense, that they don't need to get just too caught up in who they are. Anonymous, that's the word. They can come and be anonymous in a sense, and not feel that they're going to get caught out. So and I mean, the Bible talks a lot about that. There's unity and diversity. So that our collective togetherness as humans is absolutely crucial. But within that, there's diversity. And the challenge then was, well, how do you work within that diversity when there's competing needs, competing challenges, and competing worldviews? That's the challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we do tend to learn better when we are mixed with other people. We're learning from one lens really restricts you from what's really out there in the world. Because in the grand scheme of things, the Pacifica nation is quite small comparatively to the so-called evil Western society. But there's a lot of things that we can learn from them, and vice versa, obviously. But it's when, like, what I disagree a lot on is when we tend to sort of restrict ourselves and say we are only going to view it from this point of view, which is a Pacifica lens. Everything else won't help, which is just not true. The plenty of people that come through mainstream and come out better on the other side is, the numbers speak for itself. And I'm not going to sort of turn this into like a cultural team bashing session, but I do think, there's a lot of things that we can learn, and we definitely need to be open to changes and learning from other cultures, as opposed to just instead of pushing everything away, because it's not quote unquote Pacifica.
Yeah, and I think part of that, Gio, is because we as a nation and Pacific are often in our own bubbles anyway. And I think that's the challenge, because that's not a real world. That's not reality. Hey, we are absolutely a minority in the scheme of things. And I think part of one of the ways to best change that, I think, is this idea of getting out of the bubble. And not many, travel is a privilege, but my wife and I have had the privilege to live in Africa, to live in Hong Kong, to live in parts of Asia where we are absolutely a minority. So there's no choice there but to try and work through these. And people are a lot closer than we are far apart. Hey, when we actually break it down, regardless of the differences, we're still human. We might disagree in a whole bunch of different things, but we're a lot closer when it comes to values, to priorities, to family, and all those kinds of things. And I think when you can travel and get outside of the New Zealand/Pacific bubble, that goes a long way into really saying, well, we're world citizens, not just Pacifica for Pacifica, even though that has value.
It's perspective. It's gaining perspective, eh? Like, that's the thing. It's being able to compare what your issues are or your experiences with someone else, and being able to sort of, I guess compare is the biggest thing, right? Because a lot of the times we tend to sort of, the Pacifica bubble, like you mentioned, we tend to think certain issues are quite profound and quite big, and yet comparatively to like other countries, we're actually pretty okay.
Well, that's why, Gio, I never say in New Zealand I never use the word just poverty. I always use the word relative poverty. Yeah. Like I've lived in countries where there is absolute poverty, horrible poverty. We live in such a blessed country, man. We live in such, we have serious issues, but on the scheme of things, man, that's why I always use the phrase, we live in relative poverty. There's relative poverty in South Auckland or Gisborne or Rotorua or whatever the area is. But compared to around the world, man, we are living in such an amazing place.
Oh, absolutely. You can't compare the poverty here to the poverty in Africa, right? No. But like, listen, that's one of the things. That's sort of the ideas I tend to be toying with, especially now, because one of the big reasons I started this podcast was in a way because I didn't hear enough podcasts out there that have Pacifica perspectives, right? But I hear what you're saying. Sometimes it's difficult. My own personal belief is that I believe that we should be moving away from being separate, and we need to be focusing on what sort of unites us more, right? But I guess I can't fully move away from it, because I do know that if we are looking at relative poverty and health statistics and all that, we do have the worst. So it does come down to, although I agree with what you say, I agree that it's better to not play the identity politics and look at it as a New Zealand issue, not a Pacifica issue. But I do still have to sort of use that lens, because their experiences are much, much different. So but I do agree with what you're saying.
And I think that's the balancing act that a lot of our you look obviously a lot younger and better looking than I do, Gio, but that's the balancing act the balancing act that our generations have to deal with, because we walk across that line. We walk across all of these worlds, and so it's not one or the other. Really, it is a both and I think that's the challenge. But at the same time, I'm not going to discount someone else's need just because I want to focus on a Pacific person. I think that's the balance, and I think when our Pacifica people get into that kind of bubble and that kind of mentality, that's quite arrogant and selfish. And I'm not interested in that. I come back to, I want to see all people thrive holistically, as Mason Jury talks about. I want to see all people across all of those four pillars be well.
From your experience, why do you think we tend to do that? Why do you think we tend to focus primarily on brown issues and Pacifica issues and look at them as, in a way, separate? Aside from the issues, aside from the reasons I said before, because, we have the worst statistics. But why do you think as a people we tend to only focus on that, when the reality is, if we looked at it holistically as all people, that everyone will benefit from it? Do you think there's do you think it's purely because it's selfish?
No, I don't think. What I'm saying is, I think it's selfish and arrogant when we get to that point where it's brown only and no one else matters. And I've come across conversations like that, which I find quite scary. I think a lot of the reason. So that's very rarely, I think, that people get to that kind of level of arrogance. But I've seen it happen in my lifetime. What I'm saying is that the focus on Pacifica by Pacifica because of those issues, I think, can be really positive. But I think it's also part of that defensive mechanism, whatever that we might have as people, to say, well, shucks, these are our issues. We need to really hunker down, get all tribal on this, and let's try and work on this. And I think that has some value because that's the collective identity. That's the resourcefulness, that's the resilience that comes out of that. So I think it isn't driven necessarily just by arrogance or selfishness. I think that's an extreme. But I think it's more driven out of, look, we need to look at ourselves first. This is tangible. This is what we can handle. This is what we can understand. This is what is right in front of us. So let's focus on this stuff. And I'm not saying that's a bad focus, but again, because of my faith and because of where a lot of my working life has been, again, I want to see all people thrive. And I think that's the balance that we have. And if Pacific people want to focus on Pacific issues, that's fine. I'm happy to help them on that. And I have in the past as well. But I think there's a balancing act that our generation has, especially if we're blessed with this Western education, to be able to walk across the...
What do you think about the idea that the reason why we tend to become more... we focus on the group identity ourselves, as I know I keep saying Pacifica because this is sort of the tone of the conversation that I've brought up. But do you think that because the governments in the past has ignored our pleas of needing support, our sort of issues had grown because of a lack of support from government, that now is the opportunity for us to only talk about ourselves and focus on ourselves because we've been neglected for so long? What do you think about that argument that people tend to sort of bring up?
Yeah, I think that might have a bit of truth, but I think I would challenge the idea that we have been neglected for so long. And look, I'm apolitical, so I don't give a stuff about any of the political parties that are out there. But I think there's been an attempt by successive governments to try and connect with Pacifica. I just think it hasn't always connected well. There's been a lack of information, a lack of understanding, and there's no such thing as a perfect policy that's going to really deal with every single issue for every single person. I think the fact that this is a time and a space in our lifetimes where Pacifica issues are at the forefront, I think has caused people to speak out more and to be more vocal. And again, I think that's wonderful. But again, I think some of that conversation is out of context. I think when you break it down statistically, when you break down the evidence, yep, there's some terrible numbers for Pacific and Māori, if we want to include that group. But there's also some terrible numbers in some areas for elderly white people. Elderly single white people. So I think And again, I think that is a balancing act. But I would say that, yep, Pasifika people are a lot more vocal today, and there's a lot more acceptance and inclusion of those views and those values. But to be honest, bro, I think as Pasifika, we need to be careful about that privileged space and that privileged voice that we have, because if we're just singing out and singing out and singing out all the time, we need this, need this, need this. It's the boy who cries wolf. That's why I had this conversation last night with some friends on this panel. That's one of the reasons why I personally can't stand food parcels. I can't stand this whole idea of providing food parcels. I think it's wonderful when you meet the immediate needs, but actually that's not transformational in the long term for a lot of our families and a lot of our communities. And so, yep, Pasifika singing out loud when it comes to we need food, we need food, we need food. And I get that. I know that our numbers are bad, but we're dealing with the immediate need without thinking about the long-term circumstances and situations that arise, especially when it comes to dependency. We're already in cycles of dependency as a people. This just adds fuel to the fire. And so I think we need to be really careful and really onto it and intuitive and really factual about what we as Pasifika people are truly saying in this public space at this time. Because it is a privileged space, but that might disappear. I mean, in 20 years' time, the flavor of the month might be the huge Filipino community that's coming that are suffering and have huge hardship. And so, those things ebb and flow. And I think that's why, reliance on government for all the answers is never going to work, because I think they try, but they've all failed in a sense. I think it is about being really careful about what we're saying back to the powers that be, how we're saying, and what evidence do we have to prove that.
So it sounds to me that you're really big on personal responsibility and what you could do for yourself, right? So I kind of sit in the same space. I kind of sit in the space where I feel I don't want to be given things from the government, because the government essentially doesn't know what I need, really, right? So I think, and you make a good point about the food parcels, and it comes back to what's that called? You can give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach him to fish, and he'll feed a village. I don't know if I'm quoting that right, but but it still remains.
I'll take it.
Yep, cool. I tend to make up a lot of quotes on this podcast, so I do apologize. But it still is true, right? Time and time again, we see new policies come through from government, from all sides of the political spectrum, with the intention of supporting Pasifika, but whether it's intentional or unintentional, forces us to be more reliant on the government, right? And for me, not that I have the answers or anything like that, but what would really make me excited about voting and sort of paying more attention to the political spectrum, and I appreciate you being apolitical, but and I'm only starting to wrap my head around New Zealand politics, especially. I need to stop listening to American politics, because that has not a lot to do with me here in New Zealand. I know more about Trump than I know about Jacinda Ardern. But I would love to see more opportunities be given to individual groups of people to allow them to step up and, better their own lives. You know what I mean? And that's going to come across to a lot of people as, you're dismissing all the generational trauma that's happened to Pasifika people. You're dismissing, the Dawn Rays, the historical racism, the blackbirding, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I'm really not. Right? I acknowledge all of that stuff 100%. And yes, it does affect future generations and will continue to affect generations moving forward. But at some point, and let me know what you think about this. At some point, we need to stop looking to the past and blaming everything on history and look towards what we can do to better our future. Because the only arguments I hear and the only conversations I am hearing is why we can't achieve that, why we can't do this. Because of historical things. So I don't know where you sit on sort of that kind of conversation.
To be honest, bro, I absolutely echo and agree what you're saying. Yeah, and you're right. I do have a big bent on personal responsibility, and I think a lot of that is driven out of my faith background and how important personal responsibility is in the biblical context, but also in the fact that I grew up in the same statistics that everyone else talks about: state house, kicked out of schools, all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't the government as such that helped us out of it. Yeah, they played a role, but the government can't legislate a happy home. The government can't legislate motivation and drive to push through. And that doesn't mean I'm better than anyone else, or others that have succeeded in the Western world are better than anyone else. I think there is a huge bent on that. And I'm really, I'm old and crusty now. So I'm 42 years old, so I don't really understand you young people. But
42 young, brother.
I think the challenge, bro, is I think we do live in the past too much. We can't call everything racism. We can't live in those ideas. We have to acknowledge that stuff. But what I keep saying to people, especially the younger ones that we work with, is what do we learn about that? What do we learn from this? And how do we make change moving forward? And I think when you're caught up in living under a systemic thing of the past, I think that's really restrictive and it's crippling, to be honest, bro. When I went to law school, I remember I was kicked out of high schools. I struggled through. I was about to go sell drugs and do all that kind of stuff to grind and to get money, and became a Christian. So I went back to law school. I refused to go through the Pacific Island quota at law school. And I refused to do that because I didn't want to be seen as a second-class law student just because I was brown and from South Auckland that got into law school. And for those that did go through the quota, man, more power to them. That's your personal choice. But I think for me, it was not about relying on the system to get through. It wasn't about relying on a handout to get through. It was, if I failed, I failed. If I struggled, I struggled. If I got in, I got in. I think that's what the grind and the resilience and the and that strength comes from. If you think about our parents and our grandparents also, they came to New Zealand, no English, barely any work. They bought houses, they put kids through schools, they set up businesses. Man, in the Samoan language, we call that ake. Ake is a Samoan word for courage. It's like that drive. And that's what I want to see. We need the ake and that drive to push through. And I think it is about creating opportunities in the future where people can actually give things a go. One of the big pieces of work I'm involved in right now also is around community housing and really advocating for the community housing sector. I think it's a great sector, some good space, some good work. But one of the things that I've been doing, working with some Pacific groups, is how do they as Pacific groups develop and get the accreditation as a what's called a level 3 social housing accreditation. So become a community housing provider and start providing housing solutions for their people, or for our people, but for their specific clientele, the focus areas that they have. And I think that's a wonderful thing. You can't rely on the market to do this. You can't rely on government to do this. But when you can leverage off both to create solutions that are wonderful for our families, regardless of your color, I think that's a win-win. And I think it's creating the space, the time for creativity and innovation to let people have a go. And to be honest, also to not be afraid to fail. I think I look at some of the young people and I think, man, where's that resilience? Man, I had my first job at 12. I think, where's that resilience that comes in of, I failed, I'm not going to cry to mum, I'm going to get up and try again. I think that's one of the things as an old crusty Samoan man from South Auckland that, I look back and I think, well, we can't live in that past. We can learn from that past. What is it about the future that we need to focus on, and how do we work on now, the things we work on now, to affect that change we want in the future?
Absolutely. And resilience is something that you brought up multiple times, and resilience is a very important aspect in being able to deal with, let's just put it as is, the shit that life throws at you. Resilience is super important. But also I think I do think and believe that being able to believe that you can achieve it is a very important aspect. Have this mentality of, I can achieve it regardless of what's out there. I think a lot of the times, and as anecdotal as this is, the people that I tend to talk to outside of the podcast, they tend to sort of always point out, yes, you may have been able to do it, but there's someone else who has a different experience to you and may not be able to achieve what you're achieving. And they sort of use the pull your boots up, the bootstrap, put on your bootstrap and sort of get on with it. And I think they dismiss that a bit too easily. Because there is something
Absolutely.
there is something to say about finding that resilience to get up, go out, and try and make your life better. You know, I work in in mental health, so I know psychiatry. I know sort of the backgrounds for trauma and the serious effects trauma can have on sort of impacting your development and moving forward in life. But in saying that again, I've met so many people with such serious traumatic histories that have managed to overcome that. You know,
Hmm.
and why we don't look at these people and find inspiration, I have no idea.
Isn't it funny too, though, Gio, that kind of narrative, that kind of story of I did it, why don't you? That's so easily dismissed by, and yet we share some of these narratives and these stories not to say that we're better than anyone else, but actually to say, well, man, I grinded in the same neighborhoods that you came from. I had the same, and I made some dumbass choices along the way, and my boys and are still, many of my boys are still suffering for those decisions, and that doesn't make me better than them. I think the challenge is, man, I don't need to live hood. I don't need to live poor in my head. I don't need to live poor in my life. And I think for me, bro, the biggest circuit breaker in that whole journey was my faith in God, because I was heading down that same pathway that most of my boys were doing, and going to be a statistic that we're talking about today. And yet, by the grace of God, absolutely snatched away from that life and made mistakes since then. But again, I come back to your point, and I agree with it's that idea of, okay, what do you believe in? And I think there has to be a belief in something that's greater than yourself.
Absolutely.
That's stronger, that's more, that's above your worldview and your thinking and yourself. And I think for me, that's my faith in Christ has absolutely made me realize that I am simply a sinner saved by God, but I can use my life in whatever place that God allows me to go to bring change, whether the person is Christian or not Christian. That's not the point. It's about, okay, how do I serve the Lord in the places that He's taken me? And I think your context is really out of it, bro, about working within that space, and the fact that you've seen people overcome these issues. For you also, what have you seen? What's the thing that helps people overcome the most with, when they're facing that kind of trauma? Just out of interest.
It's hope. It's hope and belief
Yeah.
that you can overcome. There's a lot of people that I deal with that have so much potential. The amount of people I work with, the potential is overflowing. They just can't see it most of the time. And my job is not like, I don't say I treat people, it's sometimes being there and allowing them the opportunity to see that they can overcome the struggles that they've been through, and being that positive influence and consistency. Being consistent in their lives allows people to sort of have a different view. And there's no real correct way of leading someone down that pathway. Everyone has their own pathway and their own journey to go down. But for me, if I had to identify one of the main things, obviously it's more complex and there's a lot more other things, but the main thing I would definitely see, and the ones that I have seen come through mental health services and come out the other end, there's no words that can describe the feeling of seeing someone come in lost, scared, unsure of where they are, loosely attached to reality, and then X amount of time goes by and they come out a much more different person. And it does come down to hope and also resilience. You need to be able to see yourself making it through these hardships, because we've all been there. We've all been in a situation where your hardships tend to overshadow all your positivity. You can't really see the wood through the trees. I'm just making up quotes as I go along. That sounds correct.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good
correct.
to me.
But it's one of those. It's those things where if you can, it's also like visualization, right? If you can visualize yourself in a better place, and you want it enough, if you want it enough, you can do it, right? And that's and it's hard to measure that, because each individual person has their own view on things. Some persons, what we call recovery goals, may be, I don't have to wake up and cry every day. For one person that may be quite a minute goal. For some person, that's the biggest thing that could happen to them. Not wake up feeling sad is can be a very significant thing. So yeah, it's definitely hope, resilience are those things that sort of I can identify between all the people that have made it through the service and people who are making it through the service. Because they don't really highlight all the good stuff that happens in mental health. They only love to sort of show the bad stuff. But that's one of the key things, you know. And we kind of touched on it here. You know, you don't necessarily have to have mental health issues to sort of practice resilience and be hopeful. It is universal. You can use this wherever you go, right? And I'm interested.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, man. So I'm actually interested, and if you don't mind talking about it, you obviously. Very, I guess, I want to say religious, but I don't think religious is the right word. But your journey to God, if you don't mind sort of touching on that a little bit and telling me how you sort of got there.
Look, I mean, like every good brown boy from South Auckland, we went to church, and then yep, and I was forced to go to church like everyone else. And Jesus was just a white dude with nice blue eyes and long hair, and that was my picture of Christ. But really, it was just fake. We lived like the devil for the rest of the week: drugs, gangs, violence in the home, all that kind of stuff was happening. So I had all the ingredients there of a statistical lifestyle, and made choices, got kicked out of my first high school. And so, look, I was on that pathway. But long story short, my sister was a born-again Christian, and she was the first one in our family to go to uni. And so she had kept talking about this Jesus. I said, I know Jesus, all that kind of stuff. But it was more than just religion. It was more than just following a mechanical process of following God. It was a relationship. And so, to be honest, bro, my parents moved to Oz when I was 18. So I was hustling. I was working 3-4 jobs. I was in my first year of uni. I was working as a bouncer, and I wasn't a Christian, but I wasn't interested in God. But I had failed most of my first year at uni. And then my plan was to drop out and to go sell drugs to pay for the mortgage, because I had been paying for the mortgage since I was about 15 at home. And then that night one night I went to my sister's church, and there was a sermon that just talked about me being a sinner and deserving hell and punishment because of my sin. And yet that's why Christ died. Man, it clicked for me. Absolutely clicked that dude was absolutely innocent, and yet he was fully man and fully God, and yet he suffered on the cross for me. And so that night at the age of 18, I became a born-again believer. And so that's been the journey, bro. I mean, sitting inside McDonald's doesn't make us a hamburger. And sitting inside a church doesn't make me a Christian. It wasn't about church or religion or mechanics, or it was purely understanding this gospel message that I have tattooed on my arm, that Christ died, was buried, and rose again for my sins. And to be honest, bro, greatest decision I've ever made in my life, hardest decision I've ever made in my life, because I've had to go against the flow and make decisions that don't follow the patterns of the world. And but yet by the grace of God, I'm really happy with, absolutely stoked with where I'm at. So that's, in a nutshell, that's been the journey, bro, and being able to serve as Christian missionaries in parts of Africa, to smuggle Bibles into China, to work in orphanages in Tanzania, just by the grace of God. And I think that's nothing to do with Ronji or my wife Bina, but everything to do with who God is. And again, not talking about a church or religion, just talking about absolutely knowing who Christ is according to the scriptures. And so and again, like I said at the start, also that's what's framed my political views, my social views, my economic views, because that's how I view the world, through the lens of the scriptures. Does that make sense, bro?
No, absolutely. I grew up in Tonga, so I resonate with being forced to go to church every day, but not getting, but you know, hopefully my dad doesn't listen to this, but didn't really get anything out of it, you know. But it's not until my later years, like I grew up Catholic. Yeah, I do believe in God, and I, to a certain degree, I do believe I'm still religious in a sense. But I think that's changed for me, where it kind of makes sense with what you say. I started almost a relationship, which kind of works for me, right? And I'm a believer. You know, I may not be as strong in the faith as most people, but I definitely am a believer, and I've seen God's work in many of the things that I do, so I can't deny that there is, the God's power and God's work through a lot of the stuff that work through me, and I'm sure works through you as well.
Yeah, and I think people easily discount that faith element, and I think being brown is a huge plus because that allows us to bring that into the conversation as well. And I think often even with Te Ao Māori and that Te Ao Māori framework and that spiritual well-being, that opens the door again to that conversation. And again, Māori and Pacific are the flavors of the month. Māori should probably be the flavors of forever in terms of tangata whenua. But at the same time, that being brown allows for that conversation. And so you can tell, bro, I'm unashamed of my faith. When I'm out there causing trouble with politicians, engaging with ministers of parliament and having these discussions, I don't hide my faith at all because that's what drives everything that I do. But I'm really blessed to work for an organization that is a church before we're a social service agency, because you can't separate your what from your why. Even though government might try and do that with funding, we can't separate that because your why drives your what. And so, and vice versa, to be honest. So I think that's the challenge. But I think faith is often dismissed, and we throw around the label of I'm an atheist, I don't believe in that stuff. And I hear that a lot around our country. I do a lot of street preaching and street witnessing. I really enjoy that kind of on the market when people are angry, when people are enjoying a conversation. I really enjoy that. But I think having that faith, you talked about hope, bro. Where does that hope come from? For people, they might find it in their culture, their family, and that's positive as well. But I think having that foundation, I think, is absolutely critical to resilience. There's no way to build a house if that foundation isn't strong. And Christ talks about that a lot in Matthew 5 and Matthew 7. So I think that's I think the joy that comes when you have that kind of foundation. The challenge then is, how do we build the house? Making sure that we're building a house that isn't just for that looks good, but has no substance, but is a house and a life that is used ideally, in my perspective, for God's glory, but also secondly to serve humanity. I think that's a privilege to have.
That's powerful, man. That's very powerful. It interests me how you find, whether you find it difficult to sort of hold these views in a society that's very quickly turning away and at times dismissing and laughing at people who sort of hold these kind of faiths. How difficult is it for you to work with people who may differ from your opinion and also this preaching on the street? Like, do you find it difficult at all? Do you come across people who are so worked up and triggered by you trying to preach the word of God?
Yeah. I find it a joy, to be honest, bro, because as much as people on the street might be a stranger, but I would love them enough to tell them the truth according to my worldview. And if I truly believe that hell is a real place, and that we as sinners are destined for that place. As a lawyer, I understand this. You commit the crime, you're guilty of you commit the crime, you should be punished for the crime. And so I would love that person enough to say that this is the golden ticket out of that crime. To love that person enough to say, I can't change all of your social issues, I can't change all of your economic issues, but in terms of a circuit breaker around belief, here's the gospel message that Christ died for our sins, was buried, and rose again. That's simple. It's up to you whether you agree with it or not, but I love them enough to tell them the truth according to my context. And if they disagree, that's fine. I'm a big boy, bro. I've had people spit on me and get angry at me and all that kind of stuff, and that's okay, because ultimately I represent Christ when I'm there, not for my own popularity, or I don't care about my own profile. I think it is a challenge, especially when I'm working in government, bro, when you're working in an environment that is often pretty cold towards God, to be honest. And we live in a postmodern society where everyone is following their own truth anyway, whereas Christians believe in absolute truth. And that's why there's tension, because postmodernism says go do whatever you want. True Christianity says there are absolute truths that don't budge just because of time. And I think there's tension and there's challenge, but I've had great conversations in those environments, corporates, the public sector, because I think people see people that are passionate about their convictions and unashamed of that. And whether they agree with it or not, it's better to stand for something than to die for nothing. And I think that's the conviction. And to be honest, bro, I've had some of the most amazing faith conversations with some hardcore atheist members of parliament, government officials, judges in court. It's been amazing. And so my job is not to save anyone. I can't save anyone. My job, because I love God and I love the truth enough, is to point them to the one that can. Whether they do that or not, that's up to them. But that's my job, is not to save anyone, but to point to Christ. And so it's hard, bro. I mean, the numbers are pretty terrible.
I can imagine.
When it comes to faith. But Pacifica people are really the ones that are keeping the church alive in New Zealand. And I think that's a foundation, that's a building block, but it is a challenging environment. I've found more joy in government in the public sector with non-Pacifica and non-Māori, having these faith discussions and having these discussions around worldview, philosophy, postmodernism, and so on. I've had a lot more joy around that than around our own Pacifica people who are very religious and mechanical, often in their ways of. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but there's a system there that helps them to order their thinking and their worship to God. Whereas for those that are atheists that have no starting point on God, you can actually have some really interesting conversations.
It's interesting because the thing that stands out the most to me with this current conversation about God is that although you know your own truth and you're speaking your own truth, you're still very respectful for the ones who may not agree or may not sort of believe you, And I think that's an important aspect. I think regardless of wherever you stand on the God argument, whether you believe one, whether you're an atheist, whether you're sitting on the fence, but I think respect is a very important aspect, and being able to have these conversations at least, because like you say, we can't save anyone. We can only speak our truth, and if that resonates with a person, amazing. Hopefully that leads them down a journey back to God. But if it doesn't, hey man, that's still a journey for you to sort of walk. But and the mutual respect is important, because what you do find with those hardcore, and I'll call some of the hardcore priests that I grew up with, they tend to be very rigid, with what they interpret the Bible as. I'm using the Bible as an example, right? And if you're rigid with any sort of ideology, you lose opportunities to learn. You lose opportunities to sort of gain a different perspective, a perspective that may resonate you a bit more with what you've held for long periods of time. So I do love the way that you have these respectful conversations and meaningful conversations, because it's conversations that need to be had more and more.
And I would add to respect that too, G. I think the idea of humility is really crucial, because I don't know everything. At the same time, don't get me wrong too, also I am absolutely confident and strong on my views of scripture, and if it needs to get polemic, then often it does end up being polemic, and that's what creates tension. But even when you're being polemic and you're very clear on what your worldview and view is and what you disagree with, you can still do that with respect. I've had the privilege of living and serving for a while in Nazareth in Israel, which is a predominantly Arab community, a predominantly Muslim community. And again, there's competing worldviews, there's competing tensions there, and it's an out of it thing. But we're when sharing with Muslims, they respect those that are absolutely strong in their convictions. And we've had some great conversations, but they're very polemic at times. But you can still do those conversations with respect and humility. And we live in an outraged society where, man, if you disagree with me, you hate me. You must be racist. You must be bigoted. No, that's rubbish, man. We should be human enough and mature enough to say, look, if you disagree with me, that's okay. Hey, that's okay. But in my context, I would love you enough to tell you the truth. Hey, and if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But if you're wrong, then the consequences are a lot worse. And so I think humility, respect, fa'aloalo, all of those things that are ingrained in our culture and ingrained in us as humans, I think is precious when you're having those hard conversations.
Absolutely.
And I think good on you, bro, for doing this kind of podcast that allows some of those hard conversations, because I think we live in echo chambers, bro. We live in this whole echo chamber where all that we surround ourselves with is the people that say, yeah, true, yes, yes, yes. And I think, again, we need to be outside of those echo chambers, outside of those. That's why I enjoy the street the most, bro. I enjoy the street witnessing. I enjoy the conversations. And no matter how angry or whatever, the reality is that you're out there learning, as you said. You're out there being tested and testing. And I think that's part of being alive and outworking your passions and your convictions. I'd rather participate rather than just spectate on life, man. I'm 42. I'm getting older every day. Also, tomorrow might be my last day. And I think that urgency that I have as a Christian, I think that's what drives things as well. Because the reality is I don't know if I'm going to wake up tomorrow. So if I've got this time left, man, go hard.
Making the most of what time you're given is a very important part. A very important part of being human too. I guess it makes sense. You know, it makes sense because, especially when it comes down to discussing different ideology, because the people who get angry the most and get offended the most, they don't really hold their ideology as strong as they think. You know, the people that I've had conversations with who have a totally different view to me, the ones who discuss it with me in a calm, respectful, with humility, were able to articulate their point across very well, but also empathize with what I had to say, and vice versa, you know? So when people get mad at me, and I've gotten a bit of hate recently for some of the things I've said, and I brush it up. I hear what they're saying, right? I hear what people are saying, but when you come across someone who's it's almost like they're trying to go straight for the jugular, eh? They don't want to have a conversation. They don't want to sort of like discuss ideas or sort of discuss different ideologies. They have their own mindset, and if you don't agree, you're not on my side. There's no discussion in between, and I'm totally against that, regardless of where you sit in society, where you sit on the political spectrum, wherever you sit on religion and God. I think there's always space to have a conversation, because how else are you supposed to learn if you don't allow that conversation to happen? Yep.
I totally agree with you also, and I think and if you get more hate mail after this podcast, then I'll block your call, bro. But
I'm forwarding them all to you, my brother. Hey,
forward to the Salvation Army, and they'll handle it. But I think part of that too also I think is about being courageous in those things. Look, if we're going to disagree on stuff, that's okay. But you know, and I've said this to several people, be man or woman enough to just have that disagreement rather than just discount it just because it's different. And so I think and again, this whole outrage, this whole anger, everything is racism. Look, I understand those things are real, but again, it's boy who cries wolf. You can't keep saying that everything is colonialism, that everything is racism, that everything is bigotry. I think there's got to be a point where actually, man, what do we do from here now? What do we do now? I think that's a real challenge. But it's about being courageous to have that conversation. And to be honest, I'm shivering when I'm out there on the street doing that stuff, in my flesh. But if I'm sitting on the golden ticket here, if I'm sitting on this message that can save someone for eternity, and I absolutely believe in that, then why would I not share that? Why would I hide this light? Why would I hide this amazing message? And so I count my life nothing, to be honest, bro, but for the glory of God and the extension of his kingdom. So any hate mail, bro, my name is John Thompson, so please that's it. So.
No, I love it, I love it. For me, the hate mail sort of like shows that people are listening, you know? I think it's good because, I mean, like, I have nothing against anyone and who take the time to write me a message, whether it's a message of support or a message of hate. I'm glad at least it's allowed them to have a thought-provoking moment where they sort of listen to something that even if they didn't like, and have the time to process it to write something to me. I'm not hating on the guy that sent me that email, but and I respect him for giving the time. I'm actually really happy that that this person actually listened to the podcast and this is what he took away from it. So hopefully he can listen to more and sort of see that it's okay to be different. It's okay to not sort of everyone needs to sit in this one group of people. We don't all have to think as a collective. We are allowed to have individual thoughts and feelings and beliefs.
Sorry, good on that guy from engaging. I was just going to say good on him for engaging. I think one of the joys of being on the street is you're engaging right there. I mean, I'm too old and crusty for media and social media like you young people, I think there's that value that good on people for engaging, and it's okay to disagree.
And we need more engagement.
Doesn't equal hatred.
That's what I'll have to say.
Absolutely.
I think we have more engagement. We're more happy to sit behind a keyboard and type away, essays, but without context or without listening. Right. So yeah, I agree. Good on the gentleman for engaging. So listen, let's we've been talking for an hour and we haven't even touched on the cannabis the cannabis stuff, which I'm really interested to listen to, because like I mentioned earlier on, I stumbled across your I don't know if you want to call it a debate or a discussion with Reverend Moore, and you really made me stop and think about this referendum. So the last 3 podcasts I've had different people on, psychologists, social workers, and just having a conversation about what they believe in terms of or what they think should be the future of New Zealand, which is the cannabis referendum. Like, should it be legal? Should it be legalized? And the majority of the time, actually the entire time, people have said, I'm sitting in the space where I'm for it, and they've given multiple reasons for it, reasons that I've heard before, and some of the reasons I can agree with, right? But what I don't hear often is your point of being able to say, no, I don't agree that legalizing cannabis is going to be helpful because of X, Y, and Z. Hence why I'm really grateful that you've agreed to be on this podcast to talk a little bit about it more, and hopefully we can have a more balanced discussion on this referendum. Because if you look at social media and you look at everything that's being thrown out there through the news, it's only been positive stuff about cannabis, which is unfortunate because that's not the entire picture, right?
No.
So for people who haven't seen the Tangata Pacifica episode with Veru Moore, where do you sit, Ronji, on the cannabis referendum that's coming up?
Yeah, in a nutshell, also, I'm voting strongly no to the legalization of cannabis, of recreational cannabis in our country. So absolutely voting no in the referendum. I'm really encouraging people to think about their vote in general, as well as their referendum, the 2 referenda questions. But I'd really hope that people would see a much more balanced view on the cannabis question, especially within this context, and I'd encourage them to vote no as well. I think there's multiple reasons why I think this is not going to be beneficial to us as a country, but particularly to us as Māori and Pacific in our local communities. And so in that discussion with Moore, it was about putting both sides of the argument. And I think, to be honest, bro, I think the media, there's a media bias where everything that comes out on mainstream media, and there's a lot on social media as well, it is voting yes, is saying all the positive stuff. And I think some of that is a little bit of misinformation. I think some of that doesn't really think through the consequences of what's happening. So for multiple reasons of health reasons and justice reasons and service delivery reasons, look, I'm voting no. I'm absolutely voting no. And I think, to be honest, bro, I think it's going to be really destructive for our country moving forward. I think, of course, you're going to hear the other side come through with Portugal and Uruguay and all these other models that have come through and Colorado. And at the same time, you're going to see our side come through with evidence as well. And so I think a balanced conversation is good. But I think, to be honest, bro, a lot of people use this term social justice, and a lot of people throw this term around. I'm not one that ascribes to the current usage of the term, because I think that's an overused, underexplained term. But if you use that kind of thinking and that kind of terminology, I think it will be a massive social injustice if we legalize recreational cannabis in our country. And one of the main reasons why I think it's a social injustice is the model that we're proposing is a broken model. Hey, we already have this model with alcohol, with gambling, with pokie machines. So if we can't fix the harm that comes from those things, especially in my community of South Auckland and others like it, how the hell do we think we're going to fix it with the cannabis model? Hey, I said this statistic a couple of times that that alcohol-related harm costs about $7 billion to our country, and yet we only bring in about $1 billion of tax revenue from alcohol. So 7 times the amount of harm in alcohol that comes through on compared to the tax that comes in. Is that really the kind of model that we're looking to implement with this new cannabis regime? So yeah, just overall, bro, that's the nutshell, a little bit, maybe a big nutshell, but voting no, absolutely voting no to the referendum question.
Well, I know you mentioned it quite a few times, but with cannabis, one of the biggest selling points to a lot of people, and to be fair, and in full disclosure, it kind of got me thinking, leaning more towards that side in terms of legalizing it, is the criminal aspect of it. Now, on your discussion with Reverend Moore, you pointed out quite clearly that the incarceration rates, the rates of people being charged for cannabis has decreased quite significantly. Do you mind just explaining a little bit more on that, and whether you think it'll actually have an impact on criminals or criminalization?
Yeah, to be honest, bro, I think that's a false argument. I think the numbers, if we want to go back to the numbers and the facts, they show that it is a false argument. If people are caught possessing cannabis now, then what they get is a pre-charge warning. They're not going to prison. They're not getting locked up because they're carrying some weed. They get a pre-charge warning, and then the police practices to give that warning, and then for the person to go on with their life. Hey, so there's a warning there. So if you look at the numbers, police behavior shows that there is increased use of these pre-charge warnings. So again, I think it's a false argument, because the pre-charge warning is going out. The ones that are going to prison are the manufacturers, the ones that are growing the dope, and the sellers. And so this whole idea that we're going to decriminalize marijuana, I think is a bit of it's a misnomer. It's a bit of it's not factually correct. And when you look at the prosecution numbers for cannabis and the convictions for cannabis over the last 5 years, those numbers have been steadily declining. And so we're not decriminalizing marijuana at all here. Medicinal marijuana is already legal. Granted, it's very expensive, but it's legal in our country. This referendum has nothing to do with medicinal cannabis. This is purely about recreational cannabis. And so, to be honest, bro, we're not seeing brown people locked up because they're carrying weed. If they're selling marijuana, and if they're selling other drugs connected to that, then they are getting locked up. And I think that's good for our community. But the numbers are clearly showing that there's been a decline in prosecutions, a decline in convictions over the last 5 years. And so as I ask more, and as I've said to others in this conversation, in this discussion, what's the real problem that we're trying to address here? If it's middle-class New Zealanders that want to legalize their use of weed, then just call it for what it is. But don't start using justice arguments. Don't start using criminal arguments that will prey on the mind of brown people and say, well, actually, shucks, man, my people are going to prison for carrying weed. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. If they're gang members that are selling that weed, manufacturing that weed alongside with meth and all the other drugs that are out there, then they will go to prison. And I think that's the justice system that's working. So again, I think it's a false argument, and you need to look at the numbers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And numbers are going to play a very, very big part in, hopefully, people who are actually paying attention and seeing both sides of the arguments will actually play in. When you talk about the criminal convictions going down, What is the root cause for that? Why is it that people are not being charged for as much, or the rate of people being charged has decreased over the last 5 years? What's the big drive for that?
I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the police practice has changed. Hey, so there's less people coming before the courts with because of marijuana, because of cannabis, and so there's the tap is being turned off on that end. So police are trying to deal with this stuff outside of court, diversion, and all the other community-based initiatives that are there to help. When they are getting to court, we've seen some really good reports come back from the drug courts that are operating around the country. And again, that there's another way that the justice system is working. Not perfect, no system is perfect, but again, these drug courts where people are with drug charges are being pathwayed to the drug court. Different solutions are being worked out there. So of course, you're going to see less people being prosecuted for drug crimes and less people being convicted for cannabis-related offences. So I think it's a whole bunch of changes along the system, to be honest, bro, that have led to the fact that these numbers are declining. And so even though at the same time, compared to that, the numbers of self-reported use of cannabis has been increasing in the country.
Yeah.
So there's increased use of cannabis. There's increased use of cannabis by Pacific males and Pacific females. So there's increased use, but there's been a change in the way the justice system is dealing with it. Rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with that change or not, the facts show that there has been a change. And so, again, that's why I come back to, I think it is a false argument to say that, we're going to decriminalize everyone with cannabis. It has nothing to do with that. And that, again, what is the real issue that we're trying to deal with? Because I don't think it is a justice issue. I don't think it really is a health issue. I think it is more to do with people making decisions to justify lifestyle. I think it really is. And so call it for what it is and let people vote on that. But don't start jumping in and throwing in all these other arguments to say, it's going to get less brown people into prison. Well, that's already happening without legalizing it.
I guess a lot of the time, because I've been exposed to so much information that is pro-cannabis, my brain is now trying to articulate why I'm hearing a different argument, which kind of still makes sense to me. Like I have, in reality, I don't really have a strong opinion on this, right? So, which kind of makes it a good thing, because I feel like I'm a little bit open to sort of whatever the argument is from the other side, which is your side, right? Like one of the main things that gets pushed around, aside from the criminal aspect of it, but is still tied into that, is control, right? At the moment, there's an argument going around that gangs control X amount of percentage, a significant percentage of selling cannabis. And talking about West Oakland in particular, synthetic cannabis is a big issue, right? So we don't know really what's in there. I work from a mental health perspective, so I know the damage this can do to people's brains. So what do you think about the argument about legalizing it and having control and regulation around what goes into cannabis and what's actually being sold out there, and at the same time removing a source of income from gangs who are illegally selling to the public? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I can understand where that comes from, and to think that control and regulation is going to sort out the market, if you call it that, and put things right. But I come back to one of my first comments about this discussion, Gio, is the fact that I think it's a broken model. We're trying to apply a broken model to which is a broken business model, to a new experiment of let's just legalize cannabis now and let's see what happens. Because we've got overseas examples where you can argue both ways, to be honest, on Colorado, Uruguay, whatever. But there's overseas examples that on the balance of probabilities you can argue against both. But I think when you're trying to say that we're going to regulate it with 15% THC levels in the cannabis and so on. Look, I think that has value and regulation has value, but I still think it's a broken model. It doesn't work. This is someone who works in the social services sector and has a pretty good understanding of our addiction sector as well. It doesn't work for gambling. It doesn't work for alcohol. And I think it's morally and ethically repugnant for us as treatment services for the money that funds our treatment services to come from the harm that's created from the consumption and use of that substance. And that's what the model is. The model is that the harm and the increased use that comes from cannabis is you're going to get tax it to the cows come home, and then that money is going to help the community. As part of the social service sector, that is a terrible model, because you're funding treatment and services for the community, yet there's creating good there, but you're funding it off the increased use and the addiction and the abuse to that substance. So I think it's a broken model in that sense. And I think the other thing that I'd add to that discussion too, Gio, is what makes us think as a society that gangs are going to magically give up their portion of the market. Hey, if you're setting the THC levels at 15%, you're only allowed to grow up to 4 plants in your house as a family. Hey, what makes us think that the gangs are magically gonna, okay, well, it's regulated now, we're gonna stop? I think you're living in a fairy tale land if you believe that. And if you think, if I was a gang member and I was sitting in that seat and thinking, well, I'm a businessman. Hey, gangs are businesses. And if I was a gang member and I thought, well, THC level is capped at 15% for the government one, let's just do everything that's 15% or over. And you're just going to get higher in my view, what I think will happen is if we legalize it and we use the model that we're talking about in the law, then we're going to get gangs that come in and fill the gap. They're going to fill the market gaps. I think they'll produce or make cannabis products that have much more than the 15% THC levels. And so I think we're not going to get rid of the illegal market that's here. I think there's still a space for the illegal market. And so I don't think regulation is going to be or end all solution that people say it is.
It's an interesting one, because we obviously do not live in a country that has experience with legalizing cannabis, and I still don't know what the society is going to look like once cannabis has been made legal. It could be positive change or negative change depending on where you sit on the hierarchies of society, right? What I am interested in is, I guess I'm always going back to the criminal element, because that's the one that's being pushed the most, and that's the one I see the most. So when you look at other countries, I guess the only way that we can roughly determine what our future may come to if cannabis is legal is looking at other countries who have legalized cannabis and roughly see the impact of that. Now, I know it's doesn't necessarily will always apply to New Zealand, but it's the only evidence that we have available to us.
Sure.
Places like the places you mentioned, Uruguay, Colorado, California, all these places. So from because you probably have not probably but definitely have a much more in-depth analysis of statistics and sort of what's been happening around the world. But when you look at those countries and sticking on the criminal aspect of things, has there been a decrease in criminal activity related to cannabis? And also, has there been, is it, as you say, do gangs still tend to sort of supply cannabis to fit or to sort of supply the markets with X amount of THC?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on all of the overseas data, but I've tried to look at some of that stuff, Gio, and I think one of the examples that we're seeing in terms of criminalization is that minorities. Sorry, I was saying Māori and Pacific, but minorities, especially in Colorado and California, they're still criminalized more after legalization than they were before. So there's still criminal issues there's still justice issues that are happening there. And in my understanding of I don't know the Uruguay, Portugal models well, but in my understanding of what's happening in the States, the black market, the legal market is still providing their services, and they're still providing their services.
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
use
So,
that,
so I
use
guess
that
the understanding that people are given, well, the information that people are given that it's going to completely eradicate criminal activity related to cannabis, I guess to a certain degree is not true, because
Yeah, I think I challenge it. I think I challenge it. I think, and ideally, to be honest, bro, I'd want to be wrong. I hope that if cannabis is legalized, I hope you do get rid of the gangs from that space, because I can't stand the work that they do. I can't stand the things they do in our community. But if we're wrong, which I think we would be, and if we do legalize cannabis in this space, then I think there's still a market there. Gangs work; it's a business model. Hey, gangs work off a business model, and so if your business is blocked here by a 15% cap here, then if I was a thinking businessman who's a gang member, I'd think, well, actually, let's try and find another way. And if they go to other drugs, well, that just increases more harm anyway. And we know that with meth and in your work as well. But if they're going to provide higher THC level products, which I think is the risk. I think in Colorado, the average THC content in the state is about 60% THC levels in which THC, if you're listening and you don't know, THC is the psychoactive part of cannabis. So it's the part that makes people go crazy. That just works them out and some real serious issues from there. So the average in Colorado, from what I read, is about 60% in their products. And so, man, I'd shudder to think what's being offered by the illegal market as well. And so again, I think I would challenge the argument. I would challenge the whole criminal argument, especially if police and justice and court systems have changed, and less people are coming through that system because of cannabis. And I think there's that part of the justice argument, but also I think there are huge risks still if we legalize cannabis that the illegal market will still function. I mean, if you think about it, there's still limitations. There's only 4 plants that you can grow. I mean, how is the police going to police that? I think that's going to be hugely problematic to think. Man, I said this to someone else as well. Think of the pressure we're putting back on our police. I think about 45% of police time has to do with family harm and sexual harm and child issues when they're engaging in the community. When you're adding this other huge area of policing, which is around plants, around THC levels, around drug drivers, those that are regular users of cannabis are 10 times more likely to have a car accident than non-regular users. And so again, you're just creating more work for the police force, which I think is already under stress. And so how are they going to police all of this stuff to deal with the regulated market and at the same time have to deal with the illegal market? I think we're just putting more pressure back on a stretched line anyway.
It's a lot of interesting points. It's a lot of interesting points. And I guess some of the things that it makes me think about is, one, a large number of youth already use cannabis, right? Especially when we look at Pacifica people, or minorities. Let's just say minorities, because that's probably a better way of describing it. Because it's not just Pacifica people that use cannabis. Minorities use cannabis, right? So wouldn't it be smart, because it's already used, right? And I hear your argument that you said with Reverend Moore about addiction services drowning. I work in mental health. Addictions go hand in hand with a lot of the stuff that I deal with. I agree. But anecdotal as it is, for me, cannabis doesn't seem to be the big issue for me. From what I see, I see methamphetamine, but that's a different argument altogether. So I guess when my mind sort of starts thinking about all these things and talking about cannabis, people are already using it. Why not just legalize it? And I hear your point about the control aspect of it, but wouldn't it be smarter to have some control than no control whatsoever? With the idea that people are using cannabis regardless whether it's legal or not legal.
Yeah, well, I get the argument. I think my challenge is, research shows that cannabis is also a gateway drug as well. And so if you're getting people, young people who are obviously using, you're right, numbers of self-reported use is increasing for our young people across the board, then you're opening them up to what could be experimentation for other drugs as well. And every jurisdiction that you've talked about, that we're talking about here, bro, youth usage has increased, post legalization. And so, in my view, this is a business model. We're trying to apply business models to a social and health issue. And so, from a business perspective, profit rules over people. So if you can get people hooked onto your product young, then you're going to have long-term customers. And I think that's the danger. Yeah, of course, it's better to. I agree in the sense that if we do legalize cannabis, it's better to have some form of regulation. And that's my hope. If it is legalized, that the regulation is actually quite tight and quite strong and really monitored well. But again, we don't have experience of legalizing cannabis in our country, but we've got experience of legalizing alcohol and pokie machines and gambling in our country. And I can tell you, and you're involved in that world as well, the numbers are terrible. When it comes to treatment, to addiction, to consumption, to use, and so on. And even I've mentioned the tax one already, $7 billion in harm for alcohol, $1 billion of tax excise brought in. So yeah, I get that what you mean. It's people are using it, might as well legalize it. But if everyone says the war on drugs is we've lost the war on drugs, well, if that's the case and we just start legalizing every war that we've lost, we might as well legalize. We might as well stop the war on domestic violence. We might as well stop the war on pedophilia. We might as well stop the war on drugs and on meth. I think we got to be consistent in our thinking here. And just because it's in use, that doesn't mean that there's no harm that comes out of the current use. Hey, bro, you know that. The numbers show that regardless of the fact that there's increasing use, declining numbers in the justice system, there's still harm that comes from the current levels of use. So when you're opening it up, legally or illegally, when you've opened up the market, you're going to get increased consumption, you're going to get increased use, you're going to get increased addiction. So if you play that out rationally and logically, well, the harm is going to increase as well. And the harm is totally disproportionate, at least from alcohol and pokies, disproportionate to any benefit that would come to society. And to be honest, bro, in my view, the ones that will suffer the most will be our brown communities. I honestly believe that. And I think that's why I said it to you before. I think if this is, what's the real issue here? What's the real issue that we're trying to address here? And if it's middle-class people that just want to legalize their hobbies and their practices, so be it. Hey, if it's people from our communities, low-income people that want to legalize it, yep, so be it. But call it for what it is.
Right.
Hey, don't get caught up in, or it's a justice thing, or it's a financial thing, or it's a health thing. Well, actually, I think you can strongly argue against all of those reasons or justifications that are put out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I agree in the sense that what are we actually doing with trying to legalize it? Because the points that you point out and that you have articulated very well, I can follow that logic, definitely. I guess because I'm sort of on the fence, I kind of have the benefit of sitting in both spaces and I can sort of empathize with both. So when I look at the addiction side of things, I don't see anecdotal, and I'm anecdotal. So bear with me with my anecdotes. But the amount of time I've spent working closely with addictions, the amount of people that come through with cannabis addiction is quite low. So that points out to me that it's not as big of a concern as alcohol addiction and the effects of alcohol and pokies, and whether the issue that this has sort of gone out of hand because it's made legal, that's tough to say, because if you look at prohibition days, people were still using alcohol quite heavily and it was still creating just as much harm, right? And the thing with prohibition is it still had that criminal element to it. So it makes me think, it's hard to compare alcohol-related addictions, alcohol-related crimes, the same way with pokies, to cannabis, because in a way, it can be argued that they are different. The effects are different, and I guess we can easily, and it kind of goes into your point as well, is what we don't really have, or maybe this is the Reverend Moore's point, where we don't have enough data at the moment where we can confidently, and I know you're not confidently sort of just saying all these things, these are things that you sort of have been thinking about, but we can't confidently say that this is going to happen because look at what alcohol and pokies have done. Because I would argue that those two are very different, and being able to sort of compare that to cannabis, it will be a bit tricky, right? But you're looking at it from an addiction point of view, so I get that. The addiction side of things, you can relate it on that point. But then my argument will still be, I don't see a lot of people come through with addiction issues that's purely just cannabis. And it could be, as you say, it could be because cannabis is a gateway drug. Cannabis may lead to methamphetamine use and other sort of uses, which sort of contribute to why they're coming through addiction service. But I think, as anecdotal as it is, I don't believe there's a lot of people outside of mental health issues that are struggling and are not contributing to society because they use cannabis. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I get, like I said, I understand where you're coming from. And I agree. Why now, and why are they sort of pushing this so strongly? Because is it really purely for the decriminalization of cannabis? Like, there has to be something else. There has to be another reason. And it most likely is revenue. That's the only other thing I can think of. It's the revenue side of things. And is that enough of a reason to legalize it? What do you think? Do you think looking at other models and other countries who have reported massive increases in revenue purely from cannabis legalization and cannabis through taxation, do you think that's enough? Do you think that's enough to justify legalizing cannabis here in New Zealand?
Yeah, absolutely not. To be honest, Gio, I think I would challenge the idea that, and I know it's anecdotal. I know what we're talking about. What you mentioned around those coming in just for cannabis addiction, but research clearly shows it is a gateway drug, and so our experience through our treatment services is that when they can't afford meth, then they do go back to weed, and if they can't afford ecstasy, then and users and those suffering from those addictions, they play between the drugs because it's a financial thing. So I think and if I was asked to bring out those statistics, I could, and I could find them based on what our services are. I think it is revenue, and is not a strong enough argument in my view, because I think, and I've mentioned it already before, I think it is an ethically broken model. And you're right. I can understand what you're saying. Oh, look, alcohol and pokie machines and gambling and cannabis, they're all different. But you answered my point. It is coming from an addictions social service treatment perspective, and we treat all of those things as addictive substances. And so I think with the revenue argument, yep, there has been reports of increased revenue across from other jurisdictions that have legalized cannabis. But I guess I come back to I've been thinking about that a little bit, and my thought though around that though, Gio, is, are we willing just to value revenue over well-being? Are we willing to say, well, $40 million of revenue this quarter is a wonderful thing, but this is the damage that it's cost. This is the damage that's happened to our families, to our young people, to our communities. And I think that's a real risk. It's a really risky thing. I said this to Moore, and you sort of alluded to it. This is a huge risk to treat this as a bit of a guinea pig / experiment, to say, well, let's see what happens. And I think that's a huge risk, because we're not just talking about dollars and widgets here. You know this well too. Also, we're talking about lives here. We're talking about families here. We're talking about harm, about all the things that come that are associated with the increased use and the increased harm, the increased consumption that comes with it. I think my last point on those good, and again, I get all those points that you made there also. My last thought is this: I think there is a bigger agenda to this. I think it is more than revenue. I think it is more than I think it's a solution that's trying to look for a problem, to be honest. I think this is trying to develop this whole brand new solution that all of a sudden is, but we don't really know what the problems are. That's why I keep asking, what are we really trying to deal with? Helen Clark's foundation and the Drug Foundation at different times, who have strongly proposed for the yes vote, have on different times gone on record and said that the decriminalization of all drugs is one of the goals. And I think that's part of the agenda. I think if you can decriminalize cannabis, you can legalize cannabis, recreational cannabis use in the country, you're going to start getting ripple effects moving forward. I don't know about you also, I'm old and crusty, so I don't know when my life is going to end here, but I don't want to live in a society that all of a sudden is going to, okay, let's just do cannabis and experiment on cannabis. Okay, 10 years time when society's limits have been pushed a bit more, what else? We're going to get the tail wagging the dog, and we're going to say, well, actually, I think we should, I'm sitting in my little office, in my academic office here, and I think we should legalize ecstasy. Okay, well, let's push the limits a bit further, 10 years down the line. And look, this sounds a bit doomsayer, but if they've gone on record and said that we want the decriminalization of all drugs, then you play that out rationally, you play that out logically, that cannabis is the first step. And I don't want to live in a society when all of a sudden you're trying to regulate and police and monitor all the harm that comes from meth, from ecstasy, from every other drug known to man. And I think we're just putting our society even more at risk. Yeah, of course someone can say, well, we don't know that. Well, I think you can look at the numbers, you can look at the models, you can play things out rationally, and you can give a good evidence-based guess on where things will be played out. And so if that's part of the agenda of, I think it's more than revenue, it's more than decriminalization. If we're going to get to the point of decriminalizing all drugs, people will think, well, why stop at cannabis? Hey, and people can say, well, the revenue is going to bring. And I think that's a really harsh argument. That I'm not saying you have it, but it's a really harsh argument to say that money outweighs harm and well-being. I think that's and so it's like any racing, gambling, any addictions, to say that, well, the harm is bad. We know that as a society, but look, we brought in this amount of money. Surely that must outweigh it. On the balance of things, I think as a rational, reasonable human being looking at that, or I think you'd have to be pretty cold-hearted to think that the money argument would outweigh the harm and the damage that comes from those substances. And so, I mean, that's the choice available to people right now. And I encourage people to think about their vote. But man, that's a harsh argument to put money, to put profit over people.
It's funny because I've never thought about it in that sense, the revenue side of things, because the way that they present it to you is, we'll use this extra money to pay for more addiction services and to sort of develop addiction services. And I agree with you. Actually, I agree with you quite strongly in terms of our addiction services are just swamped.
And can I just add also on that, Gio, that the whole idea of, we're going to use the revenue to fund the addiction services. As an organization that works in that space, and having worked in this space for a while, that's morally repugnant. It is a shocking argument to say that revenue is going to help with your treatment. Hey, so the harm and the addiction that we've facilitated on one end is going to help your treatment when you get to our service. And I know that's a really simplistic argument, but that's really what the model is. And so for us, for example, in our gambling services at the Salvation Army, we refuse to take any gambling levy money. We refuse to take any money from alcohol tax excise. Hey, so anything, because for us, that's morally repugnant to say, and I think it's fiscally, financially irresponsible to say, look, our money generated is going to cancel out your harm. And I think that's a harsh thing to say, man. We're talking about being kind during COVID. I don't think that's a very kind argument to put up there, bro. It's
Yeah,
harsh,
yeah,
man.
and that's the point I was going to put through, is that they mask it as, and it's one of the things that I definitely disagree on the cannabis referendum, or the cannabis argument, is that we're legalizing a drug and we're going to use the funds to pay for addiction services. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you're sitting on the side where if you're sitting on the argument that cannabis is addictive, then keeping it illegal would make more sense, as opposed to funding more and more and more. Because it takes a little bit more than just funding, eh? Like, when we come down to sort of addiction services, you can't just throw money at it. Throwing money at it doesn't fix the problem. We know this with every new election and every new budget that comes out from the government and all the money that gets pumped into us. We know it's more than just money, right? There needs to be a societal change that actually views substances, and I'm talking general in all substances in general, that this is not helpful, right? And then that's going to be where the real change happens. But coming back to sort of the cannabis argument, it's going to be an interesting one, because not only has this conversation sort of made me think about my long-held beliefs on cannabis, as poorly researched as it is, because I tend to argue from a point where I'm the average person on the street, right? I don't have a big horse in this race. A big horse must be the tongue in me talking about horses, but I don't have a horse in this race. Really, I can go either way and not really be bothered by any. But that still doesn't. And it's not a cop-out, because I still believe my vote has to count. So I do have to get out there and vote. But I want to make that vote an informed decision. And what makes me, and I guess anyone working in healthcare and addictions, it's difficult to argue the point that we should legalize it. Like from a point, like, how can you work in addictions? And this is the point that people sort of ask me, is like, because for a while I've been sitting in this space where I think I'm going to vote yes to cannabis, for a whole bunch of reasons. Sure. But people always ask, how can you sit in a space where you deal with people with addictions and say legalize it? And to be honest, it's a tough one. It's a tough one for me to answer, because really I can see, and I'm kind of sort of backing. So what's the word I'm looking for? I'm kind of going against the argument I made earlier, where I don't see a lot of cannabis come through addictions, but I do believe that cannabis can be a gateway. So in that argument, which is to me a separate argument in itself, I can see the harm for sure, But it's like, it's what's gonna make it very interesting and difficult for me is I'm about freedom. I believe the government should not be able to dictate on a bunch of stuff. Like, there's a role for government. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should, go crazy and create anarchy and sort of bring the entire system down. But I do believe that as less control as possible from the government would benefit me. Right? I believe the more freedom I have is going to be the best thing I can do for myself, because I want to be able to sort of dictate what I think is best for me. And like I said earlier in the segment, I don't think the government really knows what's best for me. Really. They don't really know what's best for me. They don't really know what's best for my neighbors and for you and for anyone else, They run on numbers that may not specifically represent the will of the people. You know what I mean? So in saying that, it kind of puts me in a position where I'm voting yes, purely on the sense that because it's illegal, and this is kind of weird, and you kind of have to do mental somersaults to sort of possibly follow my logic in my mind. But like, having it legal gives me the opportunity that if I wanted to practice that, or so to consume that, same thing as alcohol, same thing as cigarettes, same thing as gambling, as harmful as that is, and we know that is. If you're a person that kind of sits where I'm sitting on the mental spectrum for freedom, it's the only way to do it. You know what I mean? So that's sort of the thought exercises that I've been having with myself and a lot of people at work, So that's where I sit at the moment. Like I said, I'm not here to advocate for cannabis, and I'm not here to advocate against cannabis, but I think definitely hearing your point of view will help people make a much more informed decision, a much more informed decision.
And I think that's absolutely vital. And I think that's why, I respect you sharing your views, and I respect you having these kinds of conversations, because then you can give a balance. That's why I enjoyed that stuff with Moore and other stuff that I do in this space, because you can give both sides. And I think that's, you want people to think, hey, that, I love what the Bible says. You love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Hey, think through these things rationally and logically. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so, regardless of that, I think it's going to be a fascinating vote. The whole thing is going to be a fascinating vote. But I can appreciate both sides of the argument. But I guess, you can obviously tell how strongly I am vote, in terms of the no camp. And I think part of that, in terms of my mental gymnastics of this, bro, as you were outworking yours, I think part of that too is what I shared right at the start, that it is a bit of both. It is that collective responsibility, and it's the individual responsibility. I absolutely agree with you. I believe in less government. I don't want the government messing around with my life, because they're not good at it. Hey, and they have a huge role to play in terms of protection and safety and regulation and structure and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, I want my freedom, and using those words, at the same time, what is, I've said before, I don't necessarily work with identity politics and dividing things. What is the best outcomes for us as a nation? What is the best outcomes for us as a community, as people? And I think it is about floating across that spectrum, okay, and finding that balance for all of us. And I think in this vote for no that I've encouraged, it is about, okay, my individual responsibility. I get what you're saying, but at this stage, I think my collective responsibility to seeing all people thrive free from addictions and living well, I think pushes me more to say, well, actually, this is why I believe what I believe. And I want people to understand what they believe in and why they believe it. I can't stand people to talking to people that don't really get what they believe. Oh, they're just putting out labels. I'm an atheist. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. Well, actually, think through your positions as a human being, because we're blessed to be able to think, with our minds about these things. But I think in this context, and based on my Christian worldview, based on the numbers that and the arguments that I've tried to present, I think my collective responsibility is outweighing my personal freedom. And even though I won't take weed or whatever, but it's outweighing my individual desire to be free and to choose whatever I want to choose. And I think, again, it's the balance, it's the ebb and flow. And
that's the balance we have to try and do, isn't it? It's like, and fingers crossed, people make good decisions, and just quickly, I know we've only talked about recreational use of cannabis, and I'm trying not to take too much of your time, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. But
likewise,
what's your take on medicinal cannabis? I know it's legal at the moment, but ridiculously expensive, ridiculously out of reach for a lot of people in low economic sort of positions. What's your take on that? Are you willing to, I'm not going to say lament, but are you willing to sort of be a little bit more flexible with your view in terms of legalizing cannabis as medicinal with probably much tighter restrictions than recreational use, but still allowing it to be accessible for people who actually need it? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the reality is that it is already legal. From 2018, I think the law was passed.
Yeah,
and I think I mentioned it earlier that it is expensive, and so the fact that it's legal, we can't change that in a sense unless some government comes in to repeal that. That's not something that I have an appetite for or I'm advocating for. It's made legal, it's there, and it serves a purpose. And I know many people that use medicinal or their family members use medicinal, but the cost is restrictive. And so if accessibility and cost is an issue, then something needs to change. If the results health-wise and statistically is showing that medicinal cannabis is having this great benefit, which I think can be questionable, to be honest, bro, when you're looking at the true health benefits of medicinal, I think there's an increasing amount of research that is coming the other way as well. So again, like everything, there's pros and cons and competing sides. But I sometimes think the much vaunted benefits of medicinal cannabis are probably a little bit too much vaunted. You know what I mean? I think it's a little bit pumped up. But I think we need to be careful there. But if it's statistically showing that there is benefit to families, but they can't, but the accessibility issue is a challenge, then the system needs to change. Hey, and I think that needs to. That's the same that you would apply to housing, the same that you would apply to addiction service. Hey, if there's a clear proven issue and there's a clear proven solution, then how do we change the system to get to the solution? To cut all the bureaucratic BS, to cut all of the red tape, to get across. So I'm not gonna join in advocating for increased use in accessibility and medicinal, because I think that there's challenges in that. But if people want to push that, then I think you need to have people that will argue for systemic change, for a change in how the system is done, and of course the simplest would be around reducing the price of that, and wherever the blockages might be in that, whether it's government, whether it's overseas, whether it's private, whatever. I don't know the market well enough, but it needs to be changed. That's not something I'm advocating for, but looking at it purely from a structural, systemic perspective. If the issue says this and the solutions are saying this, then you need to bring those together.
No, absolutely. I guess you answered it already, because I think the argument for medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis can be separate arguments completely.
Oh, together, and they need to be in this debate, because the referendum is purely about recreational. And I think the yes vote in the Drug Foundation have been a little bit deceptive about some of their advertising, because they've put it out around some of their stuff is framed around medicinal. Medicinal is already legal, and I think, like I come back to what I said before, what is the real issue? What's the real agenda here? Because you can try and mask it around justice or police or health or revenue or even medicinal, but that's not what this argument is about. You know, I'm a lawyer. You focus on what the issues are at hand. Don't get caught up about the other stuff. So that focus on what's in front of you.
No, I agree. If it is purely for it's not purely, because they are advertising it purely for. Well, not purely. I'm not going to say purely, because that's misrepresenting, but they are pushing the criminal aspect of it to the forefront. But I think I agree with you. I think the reality is it's really people who just want to use cannabis. I know that the word is there. It says recreational use, but they're not framing it in that way. And I call bullshit on it 100% in terms of the way that they're advertising it. It may go down a lot more better if they're honest about it, you know? Stop talking about the criminalization side of things. Stop talking about all that stuff. If I would be more inclined if they talked about freedoms. Like someone gives me some half-ass argument about, it's your right to be able to choose to use cannabis or not. It's like, the argument is going to be difficult to make anyway. But I'm definitely hearing what you're saying. What is the argument? What is the reason for it?
And we've asked the yes vote to be clear on that. I mean, one of the arguments that they said, which I thought was, any time you throw anything moldy, there's a everyone's, we need to do something. Hey, we need to do something. And one of the arguments they put on early in these discussions is that iwi groups are going to get involved in cannabis, in the production of cannabis and as an outlet. Well, I again, talking to iwi groups, I mean, there was a Drug Foundation webinar, the Yes Vote people themselves, where they came back and said quietly, well, actually, we've realized that iwi groups are not going to be going into this venture. So again, I think I totally agree with you. Just be upfront. We're being upfront about what our views are and what we're basing our views on. And we don't have any money. We're just a bunch of community people that are caring about our collective here. I think there's a lot more agendas in the yes vote that are more than just about the betterment of our society. I think there's a whole bunch of vested interest there. And I've talked about that already. So I just be honest and have this discussion. And look, to me, I'm a big boy, man. If we lose the vote, we can get that. Democracy is not that it's the best system, but it's function. And by the grace of God, we live in a country that allows that. And so I'm not going to be a sook about it, but again, better to stand for, better to die for stand for something than to die for anything. You know what I mean? And so I'd rather live off conviction than just sit by and let the world go by.
Part of democracy is also having the right to express an opinion and a view, even if it sort of doesn't go with the majority. That's your right, you know. And
well, that's not common. That's not popular today. You can't say that. You can't say that, Gio.
I know that a bit too well, my friend. I know it a bit too well. But I guess the thing is, one of the biggest things that I disagree on is this discussion and debate and exploration of why we should and shouldn't is only sitting at the political spectrum. Why not have people like yourself, like people who work in addiction, like people who work and are working hand in hand with cannabis, having more robust discussions about it? Because politics, I mean, like, I don't know what your thought on politics are, but I think at the end of the day, regardless of how good people are, everyone has an agenda in politics. Everyone has an agenda about what they want to achieve, whether it's a legacy thing, whether it's an ideology thing. Everyone has an agenda. And to be honest, I think more interesting and more informative and more robust discussions would be had more on people on the ground floor, as opposed to people who receive this information and are just regurgitating information that they've read in a study, you know, which is why I appreciate you being on the show and being able to sort of express that view. Because like you and I, we are frontline, you know, we are frontline and see the people.
And I think the challenge, I mean, look, also as someone who works in politics and law, I have absolutely no hope in politics and law. You know, my one and only hope is in Jesus Christ. But you know, that's the system that we function in. So I get that, and there is hope. There's hope for people and stuff. But you know, I just want to say too, also, there's been a whole bunch of community events that are happening out there, not necessarily from the addiction sector itself, which I think should happen. Actually, that's a great point. But you know, I've been involved in a couple of community events where you've got both sides discussing this, and I'm doing a couple of speaking things in a couple of weeks where you've got a yes and a no person there, and I think that's cool because that's true democracy in action. When you're getting the people discussing this stuff and then you're letting people choose for themselves, which again is that freedom that we talked about, but also the collective responsibility about hearing it as a community. So no, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, and our coalition, our community coalition is involved in this. There's the, you know, and I totally agree. You got to take this out of the politics hands. You got to take it out of the politicians' control. You got to put it back into where the rubber meets the road, which is our people, which is the community.
No, absolutely. So just wrapping things up, right? Because I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Likewise, bro.
So what is your, if you could tell the future, what do you reckon is going to be the outcome of the referendum? If you care to sort of guess what the future may bring.
I think for both referendum or just for cannabis?
Let's just stick with the cannabis one.
Yeah. I think I think it's too tight to tell, to be honest. I think there's been polling out there where it's sitting about it's still pretty even. To be honest, I probably think it will be legalized. I'm not a defeatist. I'm a realist, and so
am I.
I think it will. Yeah, and I think you know, we can't compete with the advertising dollar that the Drug Foundation and the powers that be that have on that side, and so it's going to be a really tough ask for us. We're not getting any media attention from mainstream media because I think there is a clear favoritism there in terms of the yes vote, and so. But look, the everything's stacked against us that are pushing the no vote, and I'm not saying that we going to lose just because you can't get the mainstream attention. I think it does become a hearts and minds campaign, and based on real evidence and real groundswell, and that's why I think the community stuff is fight. And again, that's a good fight to have amongst our own communities. But I think on the balance of averages and looking at the numbers, I think New Zealand's still unsure. But in terms of resource, we can't compete with that stuff. Yeah. And so if it becomes a resource thing and a media attention thing, like the spokesperson of our campaign, who's a solid dude, he's getting no media attention at all. But all of those in the yes vote are all over media. And so just on that, it's an unfair battle. It's a totally unequal battle. But, man, that's life, man. I'm up for the battle. And that's been my life. And that's been many of those in our community coalition. So, I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful, but I'm also a realist as well.
Yep. It's unfortunate because true democracy, everyone would have equal exposure. But I guess we can identify that as a flaw in most democratic places anyway, right? Whoever has the most money tends to get the most exposure. But Ronji, listen, man, I've had a ridiculously enjoyable conversation with you. Very thought provoking, and an opinion that I've not heard from and articulated as well, which is your one regarding the cannabis. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Is there any place or any sort of foundations you want to plug in here that people should visit if they want more information around the things that you stand for or charities that you currently work for? This is your opportunity to sort of plug them.
Well, firstly, also, I just want to say thanks for having me on your podcast. I really enjoyed it too also, and enjoyed the discussion and the thinking and the laughs as us brown people do. We mock and tease everything, and that's part of the resilience. So praise the Lord. So I really enjoyed it. So whakataitele lava also. I guess just in closing, for those in terms of the cannabis stuff, obviously I work for the Salvation Army. So again, if you're in need out there, not real need, I'm not need like I need a new purse or anywhere, but if you're in real need out there, and you're really struggling, then obviously the Sally's is a great place in terms of our addictions treatment services, our budgeters, our financial mentoring, our housing support services. So, our food bank, we're the biggest provider of food parcels in the country. So this is not a promotion of our services, because I'm saddened that we have to promote our services in such a wealthy country. But if people are in need, then please know that you can come to groups like the Salvation Army. Of course, we're a church before we're an NGO, and so the gospel and the spiritual support is pivotal to our work with communities and people in hardship. So again, the Sallies, if you're more than welcome to come and see our services across the country or our churches across the country. And in terms of the cannabis discussion that we've had, again, appreciate this also. The best website is the Say Nope to Dope. So saynope2dope.org. That's where people can get some resources and some information, some videos about those that are voting no and the reasons why we're voting no. These aren't going to be splashed out on mainstream media or by the big politicians, but that's the grind that we have. But the Say Nope to Dope is the best website to get this information. And there's others like familyfirst.org and others that are working in this space as well. I just really encourage your listeners, don't vote like a sheep. Hey, don't vote with the herd mentality that I know a lot of us have. But we live in a blessed country. Vote. Think about your vote, whether it's your political party vote or the referendum stuff. My stands are real clear on those. No in both cases, but I encourage people to think about their vote, ask questions, become informed, check out different arguments, and don't just vote because your granddad voted for Labour because it was what all brown people do, or vote against National because you hate National because they're all white people. And I mean, I'm apolitical. I'm just encouraging people to think about their vote. And finally, also, if I can just say, to think about their eternity. I started off by saying that for me, the spiritual question is the most fundamental question to someone. And if you don't believe that, well, that's fine. But if there is an eternity and there is a hell and there is a heaven, then the ultimate question is where we will spend that. And I believe in this worldview that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, that no one comes to the Father except through him. So I'd be a liar also by getting off your show and not telling the truth, in my view. And so with all respect, with all alofa to you also, thanks for your time. I'd love to shout you for coffee one day also out in West Auckland before we move back home, but really appreciate it. Whakataitele lava ia manuia tele tangata lei whaalongo rile Tātou tala noa, le nei afi whaftai lava mo le uso o Gio, i le awa noa tuu mai tāu e tala noa, ma maa futa i nei mata upu whaingata, vi ia le tua me whaftai lava.
Man, malo pito, brother. And listen, this episode should be out. I try to release one every week on a Monday, so you can check out any further podcasts on Spotify and all the usual streaming sites. But you can contact me, preferably not just hate mail. Give me something positive as well to run on for me and Ronji, you know. But you can find me on Twitter at Plantation Pod. I'm pretty active there. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram at the Plantation Podcast. And listen, I'm more than happy to hear what you guys think and whether you guys got any benefit out of this, or if you're offended. I also would like to hear that too, so I can forward it to Ronji and he can respond appropriately.
That's right. I'll write my own hate mail to you as well, but I'll make it anonymous, so it's all good.
Fair enough. I love it. But listen, like I said again, thank you so much, brother. Take care, and God bless.
Thanks, bro. God bless you also. Thank you.